everyone, my name is Chloe and today I'm going to be making a video around the whole situation of a customer and a hairdresser. Overall, I just felt like, why would you take a picture inside someone's house? Like, you're invading their privacy. You're here for them to do your hair. Why does it bother you that their house doesn't look how you think it should look, right? There's those elements, and then I think there's a conversation about class which I just kind of wanted to touch on briefly. But if you have any thoughts on the situation, don't hesitate to let me know what you think in the comment section below. I do social commentary, rants, reviews, like to talk about TV and film sometimes. Gonna try and get back into that before I take a little bit of a break from YouTube, so please check out my old content and let me know what you think of today's video. So as I touched on, there's this whole situation going viral on TikTok of a customer which I feel is just invading their hairdresser's privacy. Why does it matter so much to you? Why? That is what they should ask themselves. And I do think on a relationship level or interaction level, there is a sort of discrimination you face when you don't live up to people's expectations of you, whether it's about status, wealth, those sort of milestones that you're meant to achieve in your life, and how people treat you as a result. I do think a lot of them link to class, and people will treat people as below them because of their perceived class position and because of their actual class position. And this is an example of that, and it's very out of order. And as growing up in the UK, if you're not from the UK, one thing I want you to really take away from this video is how classist it is here. Everything, literally everything, links to class, from the moment you're born to the day that you die. That's very much the way that I see it, particularly for young people right now. There's so much pressure to live up to certain expectations or certain image. And I just think, and I feel that a part of that is in why she was shocked by the lack of toilet. There's also toilet lid, sorry. There's also the element of she doesn't know, because if you have grown up poor, if you're working class or in like a very precarious situation, whether it's through employment or you've had money trouble, you understand what it means to have things that need investment in your house, right? Not being able to afford certain things. You know, you might have a broken washing machine. You might have a pair of glasses that you keep for longer because you can't necessarily afford to get those new glasses. Like, those are common experiences. But if you don't get that experience, you potentially behave as though this girl is behaving. And that's why she's being called out. I wouldn't be surprised also if there are people that are laughing, if there are people that are agreeing with her, because as I said, it's like a very dominant way of thinking here to judge people on what they have and what they don't have. And I think that though, like, in terms of my understanding of the class system, I think the way that, you know, on average, I like to sort of guesstimate that people view class is different from like the 1970s or 1960s. Whereas now, you know, driving might be more accessible for some people, or for example, geographic mobility. That is an element of status that people can have despite maybe not being in a household that has a high income, or they might be getting by but are not in the best position economically, but they're still able to go on holidays, they're still able to do these things which in the past it would have been very unlikely. So, you know, I kind of want to update my understanding of the class system now, because I haven't read anything about class in a very long time in terms of like the British class system. But I do think in the way that things are going, it feels as though the class system is becoming, I'm not sure, But it does feel like things are very static at the moment. I wonder if there is as much mobility is basically what I'm getting at. Okay. But yeah, I am an anti-capitalist, so there's always going to be that element of where I view the class system as quite static and quite. But then you do have people that are anomalies to that rule who rise up the class system, but I think that they're very much the minority of people, and that is not really happening. But I don't know what the trends are in the new middle classes or other things like that. So I'm not saying that I know everything on this. I'm just kind of like sharing my initial kind of thoughts on things, which potentially or most likely will change with more information. But yeah, I think there's always that judgment. There's always that judgment. And it's interesting because I think that to act in this way, there's always has to be some belief that inequality is natural and that it is the fault of the poor person that they are in this situation. Money choices is always a thing that is brought up in terms of what people should be spending money on, but as I touched on, if you ain't experienced, you don't really understand it unless you've experienced it. And I don't need to say anything more on that, to be quite honest with you. It's a different thing. It's a different board game if you're of that perspective. And I do think that it's a part of the status quo to see hierarchy as it's just the way it is. They don't want us to question. They don't want us to be critical and challenge things, because I also feel that the way that people in capitalist societies are raised is that you want to be the rich person that gets out of your situation. You want to be that rags to riches story. You got to focus on what you do. You know, you see a lot of these podcasts talking about how poverty is a mindset, right? So all of that is happening right now increasingly. And rather than push back and think about why these divisions on class exist and who is benefiting from the hierarchies, it's about becoming part of the hierarchy to the point that you are the oppressive class, the elite. And I do remember seeing a video recently where they were talking about the Black Brunch Brigade. There is a segment of the black community that has this mindset that progress is through becoming capitalists and through receiving a certain level of education and ticking all of those boxes, generating large amounts of money for themselves off of others, but not thinking about what the collective or what the community need. But there are those that are pushing back against these ideas. There are those who are trying to imagine and think about the world that we could live in that looks nothing like the types of things that I've just described in today's video. But I think that's mainly everything that I wanted to talk about. But some of the final words I wanted to say is that inequality is not natural. We should not view it as natural, because that leads to a sort of mindset when you're just going along unthinkingly with these major issues. And there's a whole part of, like, you can bring religion into it, and sometimes how that's in the black community, like God bless me with this money and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's definitely a conversation to be had about classism, which I think applies to society as a whole, but I'm just kind of talking about the conversation with the hairdresser and what I've kind of sensed in my experiences on this earth so far. But As usual, please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And stay tuned for more content.